Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 361 of A Yank on the Footy. I'm Craig Wessels coming to you from snowy Sandusky, Ohio, and thanks for giving this episode a listen. And this is the first episode of my previews for 2025. And in just a moment, I'm going to be joined by my Brisbane guest from last year as well. Worked out pretty well for him, didn't it? Um, Dom Fay from the national radio show Up Late with Zach and Dom on KIIS 1065, as well as the Roar Deal podcast. And yes, Dom is back in the United States again to join me. So it worked out, as I said, really well last year. Uh, this time he's going to be coming to us from, well, I'll let him tell you where he is, but it's a little colder, I believe, where he is now than where it was when he was last year. He was in California last year, if I'm not mistaken. Now, folks, don't forget to get a subscription over on my, or sign up for my website at ayankonthefooty.com and get on the mailing list. It's not a subscription service. Um, so when new episodes come out, you have them in your inbox as soon as they are released. I will have all 18 clubs previewed this year again. I think I have about 6 or 7 of them already scheduled, so I'm back in the groove. To quote Ace Frehley from Kiss, back in the New York groove, although I'm not a big fan of New York City. Um, be that as it may. I do hope you'll shoot me an email at ayankonthefooty@gmail.com. Reach out to me on X at yank_on. You can find me also on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn as well. Again, I do hope you'll subscribe. I hope you'll share the podcast with your friends and family as well. I love being able to highlight these clubs and talking to people who are passionate about their clubs, and especially, oh, these guys won the premiership last year after knocking my guys out. So let's go ahead and jump into my chat with Dom Fay. I think you're going to like it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, as I had said, we are joined by Dom Fay from the Roar Deal. And Dom, I told the people in the intro that you were in the States, but I didn't tell them where. So where are you this evening, sir?
Well, I think last year I chatted to you from LA. In
Yeah,
fact,
yeah.
not far from Hollywood Boulevard, the hotel I was staying in just before the 2024 season kicked off. And
Hmm.
I've come back to the States because it seems to be a good formula for the Lions' success if I start the year here.
Well,
But this time I'm in a hotel in just out of Atlanta at the moment.
okay.
So
Okay.
yeah.
So what may I ask what's taking you to Atlanta? Because I mean that's I know that's a huge airline hub. So if you're kind of hopping across the US on your way home, I could see why you would stop there, but any
No,
other reason?
there's a specific reason. So sort of I've always joked that I kind of have three interests or three things that if I start talking about one of these at a dinner party, everyone at the
Hmm.
dinner party is screwed because I'm not going to stop talking probably for hours. And obviously one of them is footy and the
Okay.
Lions. Another one is comedy and media, which is sort of my background.
Hmm.
And then the third I would loosely define as the meaning of life.
I
I've always
remember
had
you
a real
mentioning.
sort of philosophical, spiritual sort of. I grew up very religious, and that sort of implanted in me a
Right,
great,
right.
great hunger for, I guess, the bigger questions, the bigger meaning of things. And so, yeah, basically, this trip is as last year's was, is to meet a bunch of my favorite sort of authors and writers and thinkers in the
Okay.
philosophy and spirituality space around the world, and sit down with them and have conversations about what this thing we're all doing actually is.
Outstanding. Are you getting those recorded so you can incorporate those into your you're still doing the radio show as well, correct?
Yeah, I have a few
Yeah.
different media sort of
Okay.
avenues. So
Okay.
this is a separate one, but yeah, there is. It's a funny thing. There was one day I remember a few years ago where I did this sort of comedy radio show in the morning that day, and then I went on to do one of these Meaning of Life podcasts, and then later in the afternoon I did a Raw Deal podcast, and I got home and I thought, who am I? I've just had three very different conversations today.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
but look, it is a lot of fun, and I think I said to you last year that it felt like last year's big trip was me sort of going into the wild to process the grand final disappointment.
Right,
Well,
right.
this one on the flip side has been a victory tour. I've been
So
celebrating across the world.
so how much Lions gear did you take on the trip? And did you wear some Lions gear in every country that you visited so far?
Absolutely, I've got my members scarf, my 2024 members
There
scarf
you
is
go. There you
everywhere
go.
with me. So I was wearing that through Norway and Spain and Italy and here in the
Hmm.
States. And I got a couple of other bits and pieces. We actually created our own merchandise line for the Raw Deal podcast in the last year. So I have a couple of pieces of that I've been wearing around as well, just
Okay.
to
Okay.
spread the news of the raw deal. Is it pretentious to wear your own merch? It probably is, isn't it, Craig? But here
You
we
know,
are anyway.
I've not worn any of my own merch, but I do have a sticker from my own podcast on the back window of my van. So I mean,
There we
there's,
go.
but
Yeah, that's fine.
but then my vanity plates on my van, my license plates now say my Ohio license plates now say Geelong on them.
Seriously,
They seriously do. Yeah. Yeah.
that would confuse
Yeah.
people no end, I'm
Yeah,
guessing.
there's a gentleman that lives in the state of Kansas that has by the name of Brian Bay, who also has Geelong plates, but it took him a lot longer because there were people that, yeah, my plate looks just like that right there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Huh. Do the
Yeah.
cats know about this? They would love that.
I don't know if they have or not. I mean, well, actually, this Brian in from Kansas, one of his original Cats plate, because the state updated their license plates. His original plate is in the Cats Museum
Oh,
at Gardenia
really? There
Park.
you
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
Right.
So I've not let them know about mine in particular. I don't have any real contacts within the Cats to kind of reach out, and I don't know if that's kind of pretentious to reach out to the club and go, hey, I'm a big Cats fan, and and I got these plates. I haven't done that, but if anybody's listening and they know anybody, by all means, go ahead and share. Yeah. So you you got to celebrate at the end of 2024. You guys are the last men standing.
Mm.
Um, so before we go back and talk a little bit about the season that was, tell us about the celebration at the end, because for those of you people that don't follow you on social media, you were featured very prominently on there. It was awesome to see your celebrations. It really was. Again, because I've not, I'm a lifelong Cleveland sports fan, and the teams that I've been a fan of, we've won one championship in my 62 years, but I was only a year old when the other one happened, and the
Yeah, there you
Cavaliers
go.
in 2016, and I'm not even a huge basketball fan. So
Yeah.
it's been a little St. Kilda-ish
Yeah.
around around here.
That's a good way to describe it. And I think actually St Kilda's a really good image of probably why it mattered so much to me. So for a bit of
Hmm.
context, and um, I might have shared some of this last year, but I've often likened my support of the Lions to showing up to a party just as everyone's leaving.
Yeah.
So the Brisbane Lions had that incredible run 2001, 2002, 2003,
Right.
three
Right.
in a row, and then made the fourth one, and then sort of dropped off a cliff. And very shortly afterwards was where I jumped on board as a diehard fan. I was a bit young for the early 2000s ones.
Hmm.
And so when I jumped on board, they had 1 year, 2009, where they just snuck into the finals. I think fifth or sixth spot it might have been. Won the first final, got bundled out after that. And then after that point, it was really a decade of abject misery. And
Yeah.
that was really where I became a diehard fan. And so my dad and I were members together. We went to every single game. And the idea that the Lions could even be a contender for the finals, let alone the premiership, where it just seemed so many light years away.
Right.
So
Right.
like to me, I remember being in a conversation with someone who was connected to the board of the club. This would have been 2015 or 16. And they said we had to have a genuine conversation the other day about what it would take for the club to actually possibly fold. Like, like how bad things would have to get
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
are we nearing that territory? And so it was pretty bleak for a really, really long time. And then obviously Chris Fagan comes along, things turn around. 2019, we finished second and sort of chip away, chip away, chip away. But I think there was always still this sense in me, and this is why I mentioned St Kilda, that if you don't take your chance, if you don't strike while the iron's hot,
Hmm.
you can very quickly fall back down. And I mean, there are St Kilda supporters in the middle age who've never seen one, may never see one. Charlie Clausen is a bit of a friend who we've had on our podcast. He hosts the Two Guys One Cup AFL podcast with Will Anderson,
Right.
and
Right.
Charlie is a diehard Saints fan. And hearing him talk, I mean, he'd be probably in his, I think maybe 50, 51, early 50s.
Hmm.
And so obviously Charlie's never seen a flag, and the Saints, let's be honest, they don't really look anywhere near it at the moment with
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
list. And so he would have to genuinely wrestle with the fact that he may never see this. And
Yeah. Oh,
so,
I don't know if you follow the NFL. I'm a Cleveland Browns fan. I've kind of resigned myself to that fact.
right, right,
It's
right,
been
right.
it's been 25 years of futility since they came back into the league.
Yeah, right,
So
right, right.
yeah,
And I think this makes it sound very vulnerable very quickly. But for me, probably the Lions have been the thing I've shared most with my dad. And I always had
right.
this in my head. I pictured us finally winning one when I was in my 70s or 80s, and sort of going to my dad's graveside and saying, "We did it, Dad. We finally
Hmm.
did it." And so all of this is just to say that when there was a clear moment in the grand final, and the season as a whole is worth talking about because it was an incredible, mind-blowing year. I'm not
Yeah,
seen a year like it, but
yeah,
there's a moment in the grand final. It was late in the third quarter when Logan Morris kicked a goal to put us 66 or 65, 64, something like that, points up. And that was the moment I knew for sure there was just no mathematical chance even that we could
hmm,
lose it. And an instant emotion I would say wasn't ecstasy, wasn't even really joy. It was just pure relief.
yeah,
Initially, just this sense of it's now happened. I have now seen a
hmm,
flag. My dad is sitting next to me. Chris Fagan's a premiership coach. Regardless of what happens from this point,
right, right.
they'll never take this from us.
Yeah,
This
absolutely,
now happened.
absolutely.
So
Yeah,
I think that sort of kicked off. There were a few tears there, and then
I
yeah,
was going to ask that. Yes, yeah,
when Logan kicked the goal all through because it was not the grand final anyone had expected, right? Like,
hmm,
I went in. I was more confident going into the grand final against Collingwood in 23 than the one against the Swans. I thought
yeah,
we were a red hot chance against Collingwood. I thought we were quite likely to lose against Sydney. They'd been the benchmark all year. We'd had two sort of cutthroat finals against the Giants and the Cats, and I thought we could be drained.
yeah.
Um, and I just thought they would be so hungry, the Swans, after 2022 and their humiliation. And so I thought we were a slim chance to just take it, to just
Right,
win.
right, right.
I never contemplated a thrashing. Like that
Yeah,
wasn't even, I don't think anyone did, wasn't even remotely on the horizon. So in the second quarter, we were sitting top row, first row of the top tier at the G. And we were sitting at the end where the Lions had their onslaught in the second quarter, just goal after goal after goal
yeah.
after goal. And I can only describe the feeling as like a bewilderment in the supporter base of what's going on here. And that very quickly turns into at what point can we begin to imagine this might actually be happening?
Yeah,
Because you don't want, I mean, we were up by 44 points, I think, or 46 points it was over Carlton in opening round and then lost that game.
yeah,
So you
yeah.
sort of like, we just beaten the Giants from 44 points down 2 weeks before. So you don't want to go early. You certainly
Right,
don't want to
right.
go early. So that was why I kept thinking, when am I going to be confident? When am I going to let the shackles down? And it was the Logan goal in the third quarter, late in the third, to put us more than 10 goals up. And that
Yeah.
was the moment that deep within me, I thought I knew we'd done it. And tears followed by extraordinary joy. And there are stories on stories I could share, but if you'd like me to go into them,
Well, I saw you online. I
yeah.
know that you 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 were live a lot on social media afterwards, which was awesome to see. And like I said, if your club wins, by all means celebrate. The Sydney fans weren't happy about it, but well, Cats did them in a couple years earlier too. So I don't know. I really wonder if there's any kind of residual um lingering thoughts that are going to just be in the back of Sydney's mind going forward. Should they push towards a final again, grand final again, and they
Oh,
go, "Oh, is this going to happen again?"
but
Or they,
it's like four in a row they've lost, and
mhm,
bar the Dogs in 16, they weren't really like they were pretty comprehensively beaten in the other three. So
yeah, yeah,
it's a bizarre. I mean, they've got obviously new senior coach, so maybe that changes the mentality. But I felt so much on the day for, I think it's Jake Lloyd and Dane Rampy were the two on the
mhm,
field who had played in all four losses and hadn't played in the win 2 years earlier in
right,
2012.
right,
So those two players are 0-4 in grand finals, and they haven't really been close in one of them.
yeah,
So I mean, the Dogs, they were in the game with about 15 minutes, 10 minutes to go, still just. but the
Yeah.
other three blown off the park. So yeah, certainly I know someone who is at the Swans. It's one of the weird things that with the grand finals is both teams organize a dinner for their supporters that takes place straight after the game, so in a function center near the G.
Hmm.
And both dinners obviously have to go ahead, and you can't plan this with an hour's notice. So you buy your ticket, and you just sort of hope that I'm going to a celebratory dinner. And I
Right,
know
right.
some Lions fans who went in 2023 and said it was such a somber feel in the room.
Yeah.
But I know also some Swans fans who went in 2024 and they said, they were looking around at other people who'd been at the other three grand final lost dinners. And just there's an element of going, why do we keep doing this? I'm not trusting. I'm not. One Swans fan I know said, I'm not buying a ticket to the grand final next time they're in one. I just can't trust them. I'm not falling for this again. So there is a scarring in that to them. And I'm still making sense of what happened there. It still is a bit of a bizarre one.
But the thing about it though is that there's 16 other clubs that would have traded positions with them in a heartbeat, that would have said, "You want to send us to grand final to have a shot at play for the premiership?
Yeah.
Where do we sign up?" So
Yeah.
you got there. A lot of other clubs didn't. But looking at the start of the season, I now went
Yeah.
back and reviewed it. They won two of their first seven games, and I for one, and I probably you probably could go back and listen to old episodes from last year. I mean, I was calling the gravedigger, telling him, prepare the grave for Brisbane because they're dead and they're done and dusted for this year.
Well,
So, when
yeah.
did you think? And I'm going to ask you a two-part question here. When did you think, oh my goodness, this season is lost? And then when did you go, okay, maybe it's not?
Great, well, great question. I mean, to wind back even slightly earlier, because chatting to you, it feels a bit like a full circle moment,
Hmm.
remembering our conversation in January last year and a couple of months after, losing a grand final by 4 points. How do you back up from that? And
Yeah.
um, the haunting feeling of, are we going to be the Saints? That was our chance, and we missed it by just that much. And then we come to opening round against Carlton at the Gabba. And at half time of that game was I think that was when we were up by 46 points. And that first half of footy from the Lions in opening round is the best I have ever seen us play. Um, I've gone back and rewatched it. Well, sorry, I should rephrase. It was the best I'd ever seen us play up until the final series.
Hmm.
Um, and at halftime, my friend Timothy, who comes to the games with me, I remember we went out to get a drink in the sort of concourse at the Gabba. And I said, I can't believe I said this, Craig, but I said, I'm actually a bit bored. And he said, what do you mean? He said, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, clearly we've come back so hungry after the grand final
Yeah.
loss. And we're just going to be dominant all season, but we've got nothing to prove until September. So it's just going to be this until September.
Hmm.
Like, kind of just press the fast forward button and get us there to have another crack. And then, obviously, right on the stroke of halftime, Kitty Coleman, who was our most important player in the finals the year
Yes.
before, goes
Yes.
down with a knee injury. Carlton staged this incredible comeback. Harry Mackay kicks the set shot, which he never does, and Carlton win. And I was walking home from the game with Timothy, and I said, "Well, I'm certainly not bored anymore." And then from that point onwards, it just got really weird for a while. So
Yeah.
we lose to Freo after that in Perth. Then we lose to Collingwood Easter Thursday. Collingwood were also winless at that point. So it was a weird sort of grand final rematch of the two winless grand final teams.
Yeah.
Um, there were the sort of off-field story about a Vegas trip started to swirl around,
I remember
um,
that. Yeah.
which wasn't Vegas at all. That was sort of totally misreported, but storm in a teacup stuff. But that starts swirling around. Um, I'd say there were two really dire moments in the midst of it all. What one was, I think, round five, around six against Geelong. It must have been around six. So I
Hmm.
thought we lose the first three, then we beat North in
Yep.
Adelaide for
And you
gather
beat the
round, and then we
Deeds.
beat the Demons. It's a
Yeah.
strong win over the Demons in Melbourne. It looked really strong. And I think we all started to think, right, we've righted the ship here. We have your team, we have the Cats at the Gabba. This will be a good chance just to sort of get a good home win. We don't lose much at the Gabba. We didn't lose once at the Gabba in 2023. And
Hmm.
we've lost two at the Gabba. We can't lose a third here. And it was a rainy night. And the Cats just were tougher, stronger, harder. And I remember at
Yeah.
the end of that night, it was so miserable at the Gabba, so wet, so sort of dreary,
Hmm.
and just thinking this season's shot, this flag window might be shot.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure it was the next week that we went down to Canberra to play the Giants.
Yep. Yep.
Um,
I'm looking at the schedule,
yeah,
the
right,
fixture
right.
on the other screen right now. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
So we go to play the Giants the next week. And at halftime we were doing pretty well. We were in the game. This is Anzac Day night. And then in the second half, I saw something I hadn't seen from the Lions under Fagan, which is that we just completely fell apart. And
Hmm.
I've often said under Chris Fagan, we'll have a bad game or two in a row sometimes, but the credit of his coaching is there's always the fight back. You
Right. Right.
always see a bounce back. And the Giants game, after losing to the Cats and the horrible start to the season, and then that happening, was the first time I thought we might be cooked here. It's interesting when and we might talk about this later, but we did a big event, my podcast with Mike Whiting. The Raw Deal did an event with Chris Fagan at the end of the season in November.
Yeah.
And he told us that he spoke to the players after that Giants game and said, "Boys, are you still listening to me?" Basically,
Oh wow.
like, are we have we hit a crossroads? Is it time for this to change? And so it was genuine crisis point. There was a lot that came out later in the media that Chris Fagan himself considered standing aside, taking some time off after that,
I
which he
remember
spoke to
hearing
us
about that,
about.
and there was speculation. Is he gonna survive the year? Is he
Yeah,
gonna be is he gonna be back? And he had his club 4 points away from winning the premiership the previous season.
yeah, yeah.
I don't care how rough of a start you got off to. I don't think that the board is going to be making the decision to throw him on the ash heap. You know,
No,
at that
no,
point in time. But he thought maybe he was thinking for the betterment of the team, and that just sounds like that's the kind of person that he is, that he would be thinking maybe I'm the problem.
oh, he might be the best human on the planet. I
Hmm.
am biased, but I'm a bit of a fan of his,
Yeah.
and I do think. I mean, he said from the very beginning of his time at the club, the moment I can't make a difference anymore is the moment I'll
Hmm.
leave, and I wholeheartedly believe it. I expect he'll probably leave sooner than fans would like him to for that
Right.
reason.
Right.
I just hope we hold on to him as long as we possibly can because he's made my dreams come true and many of our dreams come
There
true.
you
But
go.
look, if you made a film about the Lions premiership season, so much would focus in on that Giants loss and then the week that followed because that was the week that, the club was getting torn apart. He was widely criticized for his press conference after the game where he didn't criticize the players. He said, I'm in it with them. And,
Hmm.
the footy opinion people on the various panels were saying things like, there's no sort of repercussions in Brisbane. There's no accountability. He doesn't know what the problem is, whatever. And he's now opened up that he was in a dark place that week too, and he was considering taking some time away and stepping back. And then we're playing the Suns at the Gabba. I think that's the next one.
Yeah,
Hopefully, I've
it
got that
was.
correct.
Yeah. Yeah. You're
We have
yeah,
this.
you got it. I mean,
Yeah.
you've got a committed to memory.
Well,
Which end of the GABA was the last one to be mowed by the groundskeepers? I mean, I'm sure you've got.
look, what can I say? When you win a premiership, you sort of burn the season into your brain, I
Oh,
think. But
absolutely. As you,
but
yeah, yeah.
see, the Suns game was this is you could write a book on this game because
Hmm.
Chris Fagan is at his lowest ebb. He's considering asking for some time off. We're playing the little brother who, for the first time, probably have a real sense that the bigger brother is wounded. They're ahead of
Right,
us on
right.
it's their first season under Hardwick. They really could have they could have killed our season once and for all that night. And I can't remember if they were favorites. I think they might have been slight favorites heading into it, the Suns. And then because they'd had a stronger start to the year and everything. And then as we get closer to the game time, what ends up happening is we have Brandon Starcevic go down with a calf injury in the warm up. So he's a late emission.
Hmm.
And suddenly in comes Logan Morris to play as the sub. Now, we've heard the story since that Logan Morris had played the full game at VFL that afternoon and had McDonald's on the way to the game
Yeah.
and his boots and was wearing Will Ashcroft's boots. But he was just going to be the sub. In all honesty, he was probably just going to play 5 minutes at the end.
Yeah.
at the very, that we just needed someone and he was there.
And that's the game where
Then
Lincoln McCarthy got hurt too, is it not?
and Darcy Gardner both did
Yeah,
their
yeah,
ACLs.
yeah.
And I think there might have been a concussion in there as well. I think I can't remember who it was, Noah Answorth, maybe. I feel like there was another player out. At one point, for much of the game, we were down to one player on the bench. And that one player often was the guy who's run a full game at the VFL that day with a gut full of McDonald's in Logan Morris. I kept watching this game. We got out to a good start before the injuries, and then they all happened. And I kept thinking, the Suns are going to come. They're going to come. They're going
Yeah.
to come at us. And somehow the fortitude the Lions found that night to just hold on in incredibly hard circumstances. To me, that was the night. It didn't necessarily feel like it in the moment, but in hindsight, that was the night that's the club found something new that probably led to the premiership, found a resolve, a resilience, a togetherness. In terms of when I started to believe we could actually win the flag,
Yeah.
it was probably near the end of the third quarter of the grand final.
Well, it's kind of, you kind of, maybe Logan Morris was, you know, looking at, trying to, emulate the players from, the 50s and 60s, who would go in at halftime and, and drink a beer and have a couple of darts, in the clubhouse before they come back out. I mean, I've seen pictures of the guys, tying their boots and they've got a cigarette between their lips and such. And I'm thinking,
Yes, yeah,
how do you,
yeah,
how do you run those kinds of distances and use all that aerobic energy and you're smoking a cigarette? How does that work?
yeah. Different time, hey. I guess probably the people smoking were the ones playing key forward in the days when you didn't have to
There you
leave
go. Yeah,
goal
yeah.
square.
That's a
Um,
really good point.
but he was. I mean, the thing about Logan is he was a pick in the 30s when we drafted him, and no one had heard much about
Hmm.
him. It wasn't sometimes draftees come in with a lot of hype and excitement.
Right, right.
There's really none of that. I mean, we just lost a grand final. People thought the list is pretty much there, but you just go to the draft anyway. And then there was a preseason match, an intra-club match in February, where word comes out that Logan Morris has kicked 4 goals on Harris Andrews.
Yeah,
And I remember talking to Mike Whiting, my co-host, about it and going like, what, who's this kid? Who
yeah,
the hell's Logan Morris? And it probably, that story goes to show a lot of like there's a young generation of player, and they're all through the competition. Kai Lohmann's another one for us. There is a young generation of player who Will Ashcroft, Nick Dacos, Harry Sheasel, they're all through the comp, who just don't seem to care about this old sort of way that you had to progress. Like you have
yeah.
to come in slow and work your way up. It's almost like they have this confidence to think, well, I'm ready now. I'm just going to show you that I can do it now. And fair enough too. That's exactly what Logan's done and what Kai's done and Darcy Wilmot and Will Ashcroft. And that sort of
Well,
youthful confidence was a big part of how we ended up doing it, I think.
and that's pretty much, that's pretty much how footy is anyway, because you've got young men coming in at 18, 19 years old that are playing at, at the highest level.
Mm.
You've got, people who are playing in the NFL here in the US, or, they're not playing in the NFL till maybe they're 21, 22, 23 years old. Their
Yeah.
bodies their bodies are maturing a little bit, but it's, and that's not to say that the footy players who are younger are that their bodies aren't maturing, but it's just, I mean, it's just such a young age, and the window for a career is so short. I think even in a lot of sports, I mean, because if you're in your, early 30s, you're almost a senior citizen.
Right,
And
right.
it's, and I look at it, watching this game and commenting on this game, being 61 years old, and I'm thinking, well, is this guy getting old? I'm thinking he's old, he's young enough to be my kid,
Yeah.
from, and could be even be, 10 years older and still be young enough to be my kid, kind of a situation. So it's,
It
I
is,
just have a hard time wrap my head around that.
there was a funny I think tweet I saw on that a few years ago, something along the lines of me at 33. Hey, I still have my whole life ahead of me. A sports commentator saying, and here he comes, the oldest player in the
Yeah.
competition. He's a dinosaur
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
33. And
Yeah.
I think it is sort of one of the weird things is that in almost every other industry, that's kind of the age where you're really getting started.
Hmm.
sort of into your early mid 30s. And in sports, that's sort of where you're wrapping up. And there is actually, this is a bit of a weird tangent, but there is quite a degree in Australia, quite a lot of work that players associations do in the various sports of trying to help players with that. Because I know it's a really weird thing to sort of almost feel like you're in the epilogue of your life at 35.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
that's what most people I think face when they retire from the workforce in their maybe 60s or 70s or whatever.
Hmm.
You have athletes who face that at 35. And
Right, right.
that's a bizarre thing to be facing at that time of your life.
Yeah. And while footy players get paid relatively well compared to other professions, the windows of their careers are much smaller.
Yeah, yeah.
So they're most of them are not going to have the and I don't think there's necessarily a lot of them that are living extraordinarily extravagant lifestyles and that sort of thing. We're not talking NBA or Major League Baseball money here.
No, no,
We
no.
just had a guy that signed with the Los Angeles Dodgers for 10 years and $750 million. I think it
Right.
was 10 years, it might be 12 years, but $750 million contract.
Yeah. And that's
And I
US dollars as
yeah,
well.
that's
So
US
I'm
dollars
doing
as well. Yeah. And that's
conversions there. That's over a billion
yeah,
Australian.
and that's one of the things that I truly appreciate about footy is the salary cap. It's one of
Mm.
those things that everybody's kind of operating within roughly the same parameters. It's like the NFL. That's why the Green Bay Packers, which is a city that's maybe half the size of Geelong,
Yeah,
can
yeah.
compete for a Super Bowl along with a
Right.
team from Los Angeles or New York because they're allowed to spend the same amount of dollars on their team that and no more. So they have to
And
be.
it's probably, I mean, I've heard some people say the Green Bay that they're sort of should be the model that Tasmania use to show how a smaller club from a smaller place can do it.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of the things I do love about the AFL. I mean, Brisbane always had enormous potential because it's a big city, it's got a
Hmm.
latent sort of supporter base. But if you go back a decade to going into the 2015 season, I mean, even the thought makes me shudder going back to those memories. But I go back to that time and the Lions were averaging what 13, 14,000 at home games often.
Hmm.
They were getting demolished. There was $10 million of debt. It was just absurdly bleak. They were just irrelevant, really. They were in the bottom of an 18 team comp. They were in the bottom three or four teams in terms of relevancy, support, sponsorship, membership, everything. They were just sort of one of those clubs. But because the mechanisms, I mean, you needed to get the right people in place first, which was David Noble, Chris Fagan, and Greg Swan, and then Andrew Wellington on the board. But once you had them in place, the mechanisms were there for them to use to sort of crawl out of the hole. And I think there's a lot of sports around the world where there are no sort of rungs on the ladder. So if you're in a hole like the Lions were a decade ago,
Hmm.
there's really nothing you can use to get yourself out of the hole.
Right,
Whereas
right.
the AFL has that thing where if you get the right people in place, a bit of good drafting, good trading, the salary cap, keeping it all equal, will
Maybe some
mean
assistance from the league in
right.
terms
Maybe
of
you're
like
able to
still trying to figure out all the picks that the Roos have been able to bring in. I'm still trying to
yes,
figure out. Ben Mackay was worth pick three.
you're right.
I'm
And
still trying to figure wrap my head around
look,
that one.
we've had a little bit of luck with those sorts of compensation picks. I think was it Tom Rockcliffe? There was one compensation pick we got that some thought
Hmm.
was a bit generous when we lost that person as a free agent. I mean, there's always a little bit of luck around the place, but I just think I know some friends who are diehard EPL supporters of the English Premier League and the soccer.
Right,
And,
right.
one friend who's an Aston Villa supporter, for example. And it's unlikely that Aston Villa is ever going to win the English Premier League. I mean, they're up against Manchester City, they're up against Liverpool, they're up against Arsenal. They're
Hmm.
up against these clubs with just so much more money
Right,
than them.
right.
So if there's an incredible young Brazilian player who can be signed by an EPL club, well, Aston Villa just can't get the hundreds of millions of dollars or whatever it is that's
Yeah,
required
yeah.
to get that player in. And so, meanwhile in the AFL right now, North Melbourne are an absolute basket case,
Hmm.
but the mechanisms are there. And I mean, they're actually my team to watch this year, North. I
I
don't think
I
they'll be
think
eight,
I
but I
think
think
they're
they'll
going to
be
make a
around
bit of
10.
a jump. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think they're going
I
to make
feel
a
like they're
jump this
ready.
year.
They showed enough signs last year
Yeah,
to think they're ready to be competitive. So,
yeah.
if you're in another sport, North Melbourne would be on the brink of insolvency. But because the AFL has those mechanisms, there's sort
Right,
of
right.
enough to
Yeah,
help get you back up, and every fan can have sort of a belief that
yep.
their day in the sun will come, which I kind of love. But I would like a few more days in the sun first.
No, that's fine. But we need to kind of look ahead at what's going to be going on this year. And the obvious first question
Mm.
is, well, one, I guess I'll ask you, first of all, were you shocked by Joe Danaher's retirement? And secondly, how do you replace him?
Well, that is the question for the Lions this year, I think. Was I shocked? Yes, but I sort of got a heads up,
Hmm.
by which I mean to say 2 days earlier. I think I can say this. I got an anonymous email to the Raw Deals email inbox that we have
Okay.
saying, just letting you know, I'm close to the Danahers. Joe's retiring on Saturday.
Wow. Wow.
And I remember where I was actually. We had just done a live podcast with Alastair Lynch, former
Hmm.
Lions legend, and the chairman of the Lions, Andrew Ellington, at a pub in Fitzroy. This is 2 days before the grand final, Thursday night. We'd just done this big podcast. It was sort of a big celebratory event. We had 300 Raw Deal fans in the room. We were all excited for the grand final. And then me and my dad and my brother went off to see, the front bar, the Channel 7 comedy
Yeah,
A.
yeah. Yeah,
We went
absolutely.
to
Yeah.
so we've had Andy Marr on our podcast. So I
Hmm.
sort of reached out to Andy and he set us up with some tickets to go to the grand final special of that. And I'm standing at the front of Channel 7 in Docklands on the Thursday night before the grand final, and my phone pings and it's this email. And my dad is standing next to me and he said I went white, like my face went white, like a
Wow.
ghost.
Wow.
And I told him, and then I just felt a bit sick about it for the day or so afterwards, and was just wrestling with, he brings so much joy, Joe.
Yeah.
Surely he's not going to do this. Surely he won't do it. But it seemed like it was happening, and then the moment he kicked that goal at the end, and everyone flooded him, it was quite clear this was definitely on.
Yeah,
That he
yeah.
was definitely on. So
So
yeah,
you kept that under your hat though, right? You didn't get out on, you
no.
they didn't say, don't share this information or anything like that, but you just decided that was probably better to keep that, yeah, because if it turned out that he wasn't, I guess that kind of leaves you looking a little ridiculous. If you, oh well, I got this email said he's stepping away, and Danaher goes, I just signed a 3-year deal. What are you talking about?
Well, I mean, I guess there's a little bit of that, but it was actually a more sort of selfish reason, Craig, which is that I
Yeah.
kept thinking it's unlikely that this chain of events happens, but let's just play it out.
Right,
Let's
right.
say his teammates don't know, and it is true. If
Oh,
I
that's
was
true.
meant to be the one who released this, it could destabilize the
Oh,
club the night before the grand final. And
good
then
point.
me, for the rest of my life, I might think that I played a role in my team losing a
You're
grand
that
final.
you're that guy. Yes. Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
very few fans on the planet ever have the sort of potential to ruin a team's grand final push. But I,
Hmm.
I felt sick about the idea that I could do that. So no, I didn't. I did talk to a couple of people I know
Yeah.
off the record in the media to go, hey, have you heard anything about this possibly happening? But I was very careful with not, because
Well,
the
it's
last thing I wanted to do was destabilize anything to do with the club before a grand final.
yeah. I mean, this is in a much smaller scale, but I've where I teach school, I've been the public address announcer for our school's football program for the last 14 years. And we lost the state championship by a single point this year, but
Mm.
something happened actually our head coach did the week before the championship game that was like it was unforgivable on my part. So I resigned my position as
Right.
the announcer. I stepped away from it last Friday. Because I, in the letter I wrote, I said, I can't continue being part of this and, having it appear that I'm sanctioning, this group that's being, led by this person that I no longer respect. So I can certainly see
Right. Well,
where
it's
you're
just,
coming from on this. Yeah.
but see, I suppose the thing is, you have a genuine stake in that game. I'm just a fan who does a podcast, Craig, and I kept thinking,
Right, but you got yeah, you're a fan that does a podcast, but you also have tentacles isn't the right word, but you have a lot of
there's
inroads with the
connection.
club that maybe that a lot of other podcasts may not have.
I guess it's just one of those things, and that is true. There's a lovely sort of connection we have with the club, which is
Yeah.
sort of, we initially were coming from the club, which is why,
Hmm.
but there was certainly a moment I could sort of picture the rest of my life. Imagine the Lions come out and lose, and I've
Yeah.
tweeted this Danaher
Yeah.
news.
Yeah.
Lions come out and lose, and in like 10 years' time, Chris Fagan is being interviewed, and he says that was our best shot, but the Joe news set unsettled us the night before.
Oh gosh.
And I sit there and go, I actually lost my team the grand final. Like that's
Yeah.
like, and I know I'm over dramatizing it. I know the odds that anything I could do could be that impactful are very slim, but there is a slim chance
Yeah.
it could have played a role. And so,
And then
anyway, one way or another, it came out the night before. Anyway, Mitch Cleary at Channel 7 reported it,
yeah.
the Joe News, and no one at the club will absolutely confirm this, but I
Yeah.
kind of believe all the players knew. Chris Fagan certainly knew, but
Yeah.
I think all of the players knew as well at that point. And
I think it's probably similar to what the Joel Selwood situation 2 years earlier. Yeah.
yeah,
But
there are some parallels. Although the thing with Joe, and Fags said this at the club champion dinner. Apparently, Joe pulled Fags aside after the 2023 grand final and said, "Had we won that game, I was going to retire."
wow.
And so this is September, October of
Yeah.
2023. And Joe said, "But because we didn't, I'm going to go on one more, and hopefully we can do
Okay.
it then. But
Okay.
I'm letting you know now, I'm going to retire the end of next year." So Fags knew for a whole year and
Okay.
kept it
Okay.
under his hat, which is
Yeah.
incredible. There's no secrets in footy, but somehow Chris Fagan
Yeah.
held onto that one for an entire year. So, um,
In that regard, does it help that Brisbane is away from kind of the hub of footy media?
this certainly does help.
Okay.
It probably also helps, I think, that everyone involved in terms of Joe and Fags. I mean, these are not people who are media spotlight seeking, which
Yeah.
there are a number of those in the footy
Yeah.
industry, and those two are not them. So
I don't think I've ever seen Joe Danaher interviewed. I mean,
no,
other than
it's a
just
bit of
like
a funny joke.
a short Q&A after a game, I don't think I've ever seen him do an interview.
He famously hates the media, and there's a lot of
Okay.
reasons behind that. I mean, famous footy family, the Danaher,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
the one of the next generation who went on to be a good player. So all the pressure's on his back. He goes to Essendon as a father son, and as he gets there, literally he's drafted in, and it's that off season that the whole drug saga breaks.
Yeah.
And so he is seen as the great white hope to lead Essendon forward. He's the only, young player generation who hasn't been caught up in it. And
Right. Right.
so there's a lot going on for Joe from a very early age. And he's just a slightly quirky guy who I think likes to do things his own way and be away from all of that media and that noise. So I guess I got to the point with Joe while there was, and I'm serious, there was a few weeks after the grand final where alongside the immense joy, I was
Hmm.
in a real funk because he's probably, I don't know if I'd say he's my favorite player that I've
Yeah.
ever seen play, but he has brought more joy to the experience of watching footy than any player I've ever seen.
Okay.
Alongside probably Charlie Cameron for me. Those
Yeah.
two
Yeah.
spark the joy,
Right.
they
Right.
bring a hell of a lot. And but the more and more I had time over the summer to think about it, or our summer to think about it, I just got to the point of thinking, well, what he did in that Giants game, those two goals at the end to seal the most incredible finals comeback, and cement his reputation, and
Hmm.
then the last goal in a premiership, you know, I kept thinking, well, you literally couldn't end the story. Like, no, the amount of players. This is a bit like Joel Selwood. The amount of players like Selwood who get the fairy tale finish to their career. We're
Yeah.
talking like a less than 1% probably.
It might even be, yeah, it might even be even minuscule. Yeah, that's,
It's a
it's, yeah.
tiny, tiny percentage. And so there's a part of me that thinks, well, I kind of love the fact it almost feels like the perfect summation to the bizarre Joe Danaher story that, he comes to Brisbane, he has a few good years with us. People criticize him for not caring enough, but then when the pressure's on, he stands up and wins us a semi-final against the Giants,
Hmm.
kicks the last goal in a premiership, and goes off into the sunset as a premiership player. So in that's probably sums up the loss of Joe in terms of how we replace him. This is why it is the only reason that I don't think we're going to really win the premiership this year.
Okay.
I can't see us doing it. It's a bold call, but I think Joe is probably structurally our most important player. In terms of key defenders, where Harris Andrews is a superstar, but we have Jack Payne, Tom Doedee, Dara Joyce, Darcy Gardiner, Ryan Lester. We have a bunch of key
You
defenders.
got
Then
Coleman coming back as well.
right, and
Yeah.
they're not on Harris's level, perhaps, but they
Yeah.
are close enough. The other key
Yeah.
defenders we have that if Harris had retired, I would have thought, well, that'll be interesting to see if we can cover that. But there's
Hmm.
enough reason to believe we can. I just don't know with the Joe front. I just feel like uh,
Yeah.
we're going to be
Yeah.
quite short a target up
Yeah.
forward.
The question is, can Eric Hipwood kind of jump in and become that guy? Yeah.
Right, right. And then can the person behind Eric, who's
Right.
probably Henry Smith, step up and become what Eric Hipwood's been? Right. So you need
I mean,
two players to make an
how much
enormous
do you
squad.
think they're going to rely on Sam Day?
There's a really good question.
I mean, because he played, I think, 5 or 6 games last year. He did have 3 multi-goal games last year with
Well,
Gold Coast.
he's one of those funny players, Sam Day, where he's always had enormous potential. He's just
Hmm.
played in a pretty rubbish side most of the time,
Yeah.
and has had a lot of problems with injury. So, I mean, this will be the question of the preseason, and I get back to Australia in about a week, and they'll be doing intra clubs shortly after that. Mike and I will be covering those on the Raw Deal, and I think one of the big questions, if not the big question, we'll all be watching for, is what is the forward setup for the Lions, the tall forward setup? Because I mean, there's two places that are locked, and that's Eric Hipwood and Logan Morris.
Hmm.
As for the third tall, I guess there's kind of probably four ways you could spin it. One is Sam Day.
Yeah.
One is that it could be Darcy Fort,
Yeah. Yeah.
the two rucks. Another is that it could be Henry Smith, who's sort of a young South Australian key forward slash ruck who we've sort of been developing for a few years. And then the other one would be that it could be Brandon Ryan, who's a 26, 27-year-old key forward we traded up from the Hawks. And so who gets first shot at that will be really interesting. My gut is that Henry Smith probably will get first shot over Sam Day, but I wouldn't be shocked if that goes the other way.
Okay.
I just my hunch is, and it might be slightly more than a hunch. I might have heard it from a couple of people who I trust that the Lions have some sort of big key forward target lined up to bring in at the end of this year. And so I kind of wouldn't be shocked if we reloaded and went again in 2026.
Okay.
We've got the two Ashcrofts now.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a
Are there
lot.
any other father sons on the horizon in the
Um,
near future? Because I mean, it's
yeah, we've had a very lucky. I mean, I think when you get those, most clubs would kill for one of what we've had with Will Ashcroft.
yeah,
To get
yeah.
two, I mean, especially to get two when you've been up at the top, it's like you have the next era beginning while you're in the current era, which just
Hmm.
doesn't normally happen. So there's no father sons on the horizon that I'm aware of. There's a couple of academy prospects. So Daniel Annabelle is a midfielder in our academy who projects as a possible top 10 pick this year. And so we'll see how he progresses. The really funny one, and this, if the stars align on this one in a few years, this is going to be one of the biggest talking points in the AFL, is that Hawthorn superstar Luke Hodge, his eldest son Cooper, I think maybe 15 or 16 now, is
Okay.
starting to look like a bit of a serious footballer. But the
Hmm.
Hodge family moved up to Brisbane 6 years ago, 7 years ago now, at the end of 2018 or 2017 as it was, for Luke to play a couple of years for the Lions.
Right.
And
Right.
so Cooper moves up when he's what, 8 or 9. He's become a diehard Lions fan. He's now in the Lions Academy. And there's talk that, when it comes to him being drafted, a bit like Nick Blakey, when Blakey could have gone, I think, was it to North as a father-son or the Swans as an academy prospect, and he chose academy where he was living and the
Yeah.
Swans. The talk is that Cooper Hodge might, if he's good enough to be drafted, might choose to play for Brisbane over Hawthorn as an academy over a father-son. And if that
Wow.
happens, that would
Wow.
be cataclysmic. That could be the thing that destroys the academies, to be honest, because the uproar from Hawthorn and people in Melbourne would be enormous to have
Yeah.
Luke Hodges' son not pick Hawthorn. So that'll be an interesting
Well,
one, but yeah, we'll see.
his formative years have been in Brisbane. So I mean, he's ostensibly a Brisbaneite. I don't know if that's the right term,
Yeah.
but a Brisbanean. I'm not sure what's the term they refer to as a resident of Brisbane.
Oh, that's a very good question. I don't actually know if there is one. I mean,
Okay,
Queenslander is generally just what we go with, but
that's a big state, though.
it is a big state. It is a big state. That's a funny question. I've never Brisbaneite probably works,
Okay,
but I don't actually think we have one, which is I'll have to get on to the Lord Mayor. We're gonna have to work on that. We need to
there
get
you go.
ourselves a slogan.
There you
But
go. There you
but
go.
it is a really interesting sort of yeah, situation with the list build because if you look at the Lions, Lockie Neal, obviously you'd think will start to taper off in the coming years. He's 32 now, I think. I
Yeah,
think
I
he's
think so.
probably
Yeah,
got another year, maybe two, at the
yeah.
absolute top of his game.
Yeah, I
And
was going to ask you, is Dane Zorko going to ever slow down?
well, this is the funny thing about Zorg, isn't it? Like he had the best year of his whole career
Hmm.
last season, and so because people keep going, how do we fit Levi Ashcroft in, Kitty Coleman coming back, Link McCarthy coming back? And you would think the answer is that Zork slows down and moves out of the team, but on the form he's played with, he's not going anywhere. So um, I guess that my point is that when you look at the Lions build and you look at McCluggage and Berry and Andrews and Rayner and Bailey, I mean, these players are all in their mid 20s still, 25,
Right,
26,
right.
27. The ones who are on the sort of the other side are the Charlie Camerons, who's now
Cameron,
over
yeah.
30,
Yep.
the Lockie Neal, who's over 30, Zork, as you mentioned, Froggy Lester.
Yeah.
But
Well,
on the whole, there's a lot of sort of young talent still at the club, and the question's going to be all around that key forward slot. And I'll tell you the one thing that gives me hope is that Hawthorn in 2013, they won the premiership that year over Freo with Buddy Franklin playing.
hmm.
Buddy then leaves at the end of that year to go to the Swans. And all the talk in the summer was Jared Roughhead can't be the focal point of Hawthorn's forward line. He isn't the talented enough player to like he's been the backup to Buddy, who's a
Right,
generational
right.
talent.
Yeah.
So the Hawks won't be able to do it without Lance Franklin there. And then with sort of a new look makeshift forward line, the Hawks win the next two in a row.
Yeah.
And so part of me thinks, well, maybe it works a bit like that for the Lions. That's the best case scenario. I also then think about Richmond. I think it was the end of 2018 after they'd won one premiership. Alex
Hmm.
Rance, superstar key defender, retired much
Retired.
earlier
Yep.
than
Yep.
anyone expected.
Yeah.
And then they go on to win. Everyone said they can't win another flag without
Two out
Rance.
of
Well, they
three.
won
Yeah.
two more.
Yeah.
So there are stories out there. Then there are some around the footy media who say maybe Joe Danaher comes back and he's not done. And then there's others, as I said, who think the Lions will go out and recruit another star key forward. So who knows?
A-
But
any predictions on who you think that might be? And then maybe you know if you know something, I'm not trying to I don't want you to tell tales out of school. Don't reveal
look,
anything that but if
yeah,
you don't know and you got any suppositions,
I, I, I have a very good sense of who it might be. So I
okay.
probably shouldn't say anything
That's
because,
fine then. That's fine.
like the grand final, I don't want to derail
I
anything.
appreciate all I want to say is it would be really, really expensive to move all of Jeremy Cameron's farm equipment to Queensland. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh, I'll take Jeremy Cameron. We can have the two Camerons in the forward line, Jeremy and Charlie. Let's do it. Let's make that
So,
happen.
um, you ran off a lot of names, that would slot into just about any other club's 22 that are going to have a difficult time maybe finding consistent games with the Lions, but which is a great problem to have. It's an awesome problem to have, but I think you've in a roundabout way you've kind of said you're a little concerned about where the scoring is going to come from. Is really what you've kind of alluded to here. Without with Danaher gone, having 50 plus goals, it's going to be it's going to it's going to be tough to make that up because if Hipwood scuffles at all and you know others don't step in, in opposition of him, it's if as you mentioned Darcy Fort being an option, Darcy Fort, was a former cap, but I mean that's an awful lot to expect, from him to come in and be, the Robin to Hipwood's now Batman,
Yeah.
in his case, but do you see where they maybe have to try to reevaluate the style of gameplay to maybe play a little
Yes.
bit more defensive and just kind of slow things down and such, which, doesn't always make for fun footy to watch, not mentioning any names, Ross Lyon. Uh,
Well, I actually think, to be honest, they may have to go the other way, by which I mean to say the slower style of ball movement, from my understanding, works best if you have some really strong, tall forwards because you can
mhm.
chip it,
No,
and then
okay, okay, yeah, that's
contest,
true.
right? Where
Yeah,
you have your
yeah,
tall representation. If you don't have the tall representation, you kind of need to move the ball really quick to get it out over the back or into space for your small forwards.
right,
And
right.
this is actually when the Lions got good in 2019. At that point, our key forwards were Dan McStay and Eric Hipwood, with Oscar McInerney doing a bit up there while Steph Martin rucked. And that year, by far the most dangerous forward we had was Charlie Cameron. I remember going into that final series, all the talk, and you rarely hear this about a small forward, but all the talk was how do you shut down Charlie Cameron? Not any of the keys, but it was how do you shut down Charlie, the small
Yeah,
forward. And so many of our goals, it was almost a formula to it. We'd move the ball quick through the midfield, and then Charlie would sort of sprint away from his opponent, be the last man to the goal, and get a goal out the back. He kicked so many that way, and we were shut down pretty quickly in that style. So, and to be honest, this is actually why we went and got Joe, was because there was a real sense that the way we play, we need a key forward up there who demands the respect of the opposition. A key forward who the opposition are sort of kind of scared to come up against. And
hmm,
Joe fit that bill to a T, absolutely perfectly. And so there are some Lions fans who will say, "Oh, well, look, Hipwood and Smith and Morris might be able to do it. We might be okay here." I just can't. I think in some ways that's actually disrespectful to the sheer player Joe Danaher has been. Like, he's
right,
been a
right.
super super player,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
criminally
yeah,
underrated. In my opinion, he was last year in the top three key forwards in the comp, and I know people will lose their minds about that, but I really think he was. And and so I guess for me, I kind of look at it and go, well, with our current list,
yeah.
I can only realistically see a path to the premiership if we do change the game style a little bit, because we do have, I think the Lions have the best small forwards in the comp. If you combine Kai Lohman with Charlie Cameron, Zach Bailey, Cam Rayner, I mean, this is a Link McCarthy. This is a serious small forward line. And if we focus our scoring power through them,
Hmm.
and more have a sort of small medium forward approach and retool things, then maybe we can do it. But if we're still kicking the ball to Hipwood and Smith as much as we were Hipwood and Danaher, I just think that's gonna. I think that's likely to hurt us. But I
Yeah.
mean, I could be totally wrong. I'd love to be wrong, but I will say the one thing I have pitched, which I got a lot of feedback on the socials about from Lions fans. I suggested that I'd like to see over the summer us trial Harris Andrews up forward. And the reason I suggested that was simply because he's played a little bit there in his career, only a
Yeah,
tiny bit, but
yeah.
he, I think, could be a superstar key forward who would demand that respect. And I feel like we have a lot more coverage down back than we do up forward. So I don't think that's going to happen, but I just feel like there is some underestimating of just how much Joe brought to the group, and with him gone, I think it's going to be a massive void to fill.
No, I think it will be. Yeah, yeah. So, um, and he was a heck of a lot of fun to watch. And for somebody who disliked the media, he sure knew how to play to the camera when the camera was on him.
Yeah, true,
He
true.
almost seems like the kind of guy that could go and I don't know anything about him, but he almost seems like the kind of guy that could go from being the professional athlete to kind of being you know to being like one of the playing bit roles in movies and that sort of thing because he kind of seems to be almost a bit of a natural in front of the camera. He seems always like he's a bit of a ham. Um,
It's funny you say that, isn't it? Because yeah, I'm even thinking about that Giants game in the final, and when he
mhm,
kicks that second goal to put us in front, he sort of has a look at the camera,
mhm.
which is like, you know exactly what you're doing here, Joe. And I don't know, there is something to be said about when you care about something a lot less, you hold it a lot more loosely, and you're probably a
Hmm.
lot better at it. And I think that sort of was Joe's whole career on
Yeah.
field and probably with the media as well. I just think he held everything a lot more loosely than almost everyone else does, and it was part of his charm and yeah, a legacy that will be remembered and treasured
Yeah.
for a very
And
long
I don't
time.
know, maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but is he somebody who enjoyed surfing? Because he just seemed to be like a really, just like a really just laid back guy that he took the game seriously, but it just looked like, and this is going to come out sounding wrong. Often it looked like he wasn't trying hard,
Yes,
but
yes.
but but he
Yeah.
but you knew that he was, but maybe it's just because it was so easy for him.
But I do think he had a different relationship with it than
Yeah.
most people do. I think he did play it like a game. I think
Yeah.
a great example was this 2022, I think it might have been, or 2021. Anyway, there was a game early in the season at the Gabba where just on the stroke of half time, Joe takes a mark, a great mark, in the goal square.
Hmm.
And then he handballs off. He might actually hand pass it off to Nakai Cockatoo, funnily enough. But the moment he hand passes it off to Nakai Cockatoo, the siren goes. And
Yeah.
so we sort of didn't get a shot at the goal. And it's a very funny sort of moment because most players in the game would look forlorn and embarrassed and what the hell have I just done? And Joe sort of chuckles to himself. Like there's an element where he's like, oh, that was a funny thing that happened there. And I think that was part of his charm. And I actually do think generally in sports across the world, I mean, I can speak from an AFL perspective, but when Chris Fagan joined the Lions,
Hmm.
one of the things he kept saying was we need to primarily remember, and this is why he refuted the sort of Ross Lyon defensive coaching. He didn't mention Ross, but defensive coaching.
Hmm.
He said we need to remember we are in the entertainment industry.
Yeah, that's
It's
true.
something
Yeah.
people are coming to be entertained. It's a
Yeah.
game that you go to be entertained. And I think sometimes we hold sports so tightly and anxiously, and you can't do that. Do you care? And I
Yeah,
just
that's a great point. That's a
think
great point.
Joe's been a wonderful reminder of the lightness, the looseness, and just the fun
Yeah.
of the game of it.
So we go through 2025.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I guess what's your bold prediction for the club? What's the one thing you're going to plant your flag and say, I think this is going to happen. And when I mention it on the Roar deal, people are going to look at their phone or their computer and go, "What was he eating overseas? Is it still impacting him here?"
Okay, if you're my bold prediction, because I have been thinking about it a bit over the break. I think Will and Levi Ashcroft will both be All Australian 22 members in 2025,
Wow.
which would be
Wow.
yeah.
That's that would be, that's huge. I mean, I could certainly see Will, but you bring your brother in, not having played a game. I mean, it could happen, but it's and I guess I've not researched about how many instances have there been where there's been a first year player that's been all Australian.
Yeah, not many, not
Okay.
many at all.
Okay.
I suppose. So Levi played one game for the Lions in the VFL in the reserves level last year in his draft
Okay.
year. Just one.
Okay.
He got Brisbane to play one. And I remember watching it, and he was still 17 at the time. He's a
Yeah.
December birth. So
Yeah.
he hadn't even turned 18 yet. And he was easily the best player on the ground from either team.
Right.
He had like 2 goals, 30 plus touches. He was playing alongside, Jared Lyons was out there, and like there was a lot of serious long-term football talent out there.
Hmm.
And Levi instantly was a class above. And I kind of think Will, after winning the Norm Smith and now being, another year on from knee recovery, his knee
Right.
injury
Right.
recovery, having his brother out there and Levi coming into this team with his brother out there as well. I just feel like as sort of a 1-2 punch,
Yeah.
they're going to be set for an enormous year and are going to be my sense is that in the last few years, when people think of the Lions, the faces they've thought of have been Lockie Neal and Joe Danaher and Charlie Cameron, probably
Hmm.
maybe Hans Andrews. I think in the next year or two, you're going to think Levi and Will Ashcroft. The two Ashcroft boys are going to become sort of the face of the
Yeah.
Lion, my sense of things.
But that doesn't surprise me at all. Yeah.
So,
So,
yeah, there we go. There's my prediction.
what's the headline in the Courier Mail at the end of the year about the Lions season? Whenever it ends, what's the headline in the paper?
Um, the headline in the paper. Um, I think it's probably going to be a focused on a tribute to Dane Zorko's career as the Lions limp out of the finals. That's my gut feel.
Okay.
Something about, maybe we've lost in the semi-finals. And there's I could see a shot of Dane Zorko being chaired off the ground, Premiership player Dane Zorko.
There
And,
you go.
like when Lions fans, I've said this to a few, and they get quite upset. This idea that that I don't think we're going to win the premiership, but I've said to them I think it's the last two premiers. Is it? Yeah, I think it's the last two haven't made the finals the next year. Geelong and Collingwood didn't make the finals at all in
Great
the
point.
next year.
Yes, they
The
did.
year
That's right.
before, Melbourne in 2021 went out in straight sets.
Hmm.
Richmond won it in 2020, and I think they made the finals in 2021, but I
I think
can't
they did.
remember
Yeah.
how they
But
went in that final series.
yeah.
Anyway, the point is to say, since Richmond in 2020, backing up from 2019, we actually haven't seen a Premier come back with a really strong next season. So the
Right.
form
Right.
line suggests that it's really hard to stoke that fire to go again immediately.
Yeah.
And so I think at the end of the year, it's probably going to be Zorko retires, a generation or an era of that sort ends. And then this new key forward comes in to reset, and here we go again, 2026.
I like it. I mean, I don't like seeing anybody retire. That's not me. I've got about 3 years before I retire from teaching, but
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm not ready yet, but every day I get maybe just a little closer. But it's I've got coworkers that are that they're finishing up this year and they're excited, and I they actually changed the retirement rules in our state to where I could actually retire a year earlier, and I told my wife about it, and she's like, "Well, I won't be retired yet," and I'm thinking. Yeah, but I'm also 4 years older than you are, and you're going to be using my retirement a lot longer than I am. So I'll be done with it. I'll be gone. You're still going to be collecting on it. So I don't want to
Yeah.
hear about it. So yeah, yeah. So are you ready for some Lions trivia here before we wrap up?
Throw
Because
it my
I know
way.
you've
We'll
had a
see how I
long
go.
day. I'm not sure where you flew in from, but I know you have had a long day, and you probably need to get yourself some shut eye before you go and meet up with some folks tomorrow.
Well, I will say I have in the last 5 days gone London to New York, New York to LA, and LA to Atlanta. So there's been a bit of travel going
Holy
on.
cow.
And I'm just throwing that in there as a great sort of out clause if I fail here at the trivia.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I did tell you that in the message I sent to you on X, but I'm disregarding that now. You have to get them all right. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Okay. So,
See how we go.
the first one, who was third in goals kicked for the club last year behind Danaher and Cameron?
Oh, that is a good question.
They kicked
Oh,
36. They
kick
kicked 36.
36 goals. Um, I mean, the first inkling would be to say that you would think it would be Hipwood, but I just don't think it would have been Hippie because he did miss a patch and he was a
Yeah,
bit in. So I just don't think it would have been
it
Hippie.
was not him.
Um, The next thought is Rayner, but I don't think Rayner would have kicked that many. So that makes me think it wasn't Kai Lohman, was it?
Yes, it was. Yeah. Yeah.
Seriously.
36. Yeah. Yep.
Wow. Third in the
Yeah.
goal kick. I mean, this is the funny thing about Kai is that like he nearly left at the end of 2023. He was set up to go back to Melbourne. He hadn't
Hmm.
shown anything much. He hadn't had a chance at the senior level and he'd been injured and he was homesick. And it just become a breakout superstar of the club. I was saying this to someone after the grand final. If you had said at the start of 2024, the Lions are going to win the premiership and Charlie Cameron isn't going to be the superstar small forward who does it for them, it'll be someone else.
Wow.
You wouldn't
Yeah.
have believed it,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's Kai has just exploded onto the scene.
Yep. Okay, so this is a bit of a trend here. Because I had to mix some things up because so Harris Andrews led the club in one percenters last year again. Who
Mm.
finished second behind him?
In one percenters,
Yeah. Which
I
again, I love that I love that idea of that statistic. I just love the one
yes.
percenter thing. It's just an awesome, I don't know if I could be the statistician that determines those and records those. I mean, it's kind of hard, Did he shepherd there? What was that?
Well, I can tell you, I'm pretty confident it would be Brandon Starcevich or Ryan Lester, and my gut would. It's not one of those two.
Neither one of them. It's
Is
not
it
a name that it's not even a name that you have mentioned today. Yeah.
second for one percenters?
Yeah. With let me pull it up here again, but um
I mean, one percenters usually think defenders, don't you? I
and
mean,
he
it wasn't.
played he played 18 games.
He played 18 games.
Yep. So he played basically two-thirds of the season.
Well, that's a quirk. You've thrown me off there. Jasper Fletcher? No, it couldn't have been Jasper. He's on the
Hmm.
wing. Um, was it Jack Payne?
It is, yeah. Jack Payne, yeah.
Really? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know why I didn't go with Jack earlier, seeing as he's another defender, but
Yeah.
I mean, some people thought he had an indifferent year overall with form. So that's a ringing endorsement for Jack. I mean,
Yeah.
I thought he built into the season superbly and had
Hmm.
that incredible last few finals, but I would not have picked him to be second for 1% as ahead of. I would have sworn Froggy or Stars would be above him. So that's really interesting.
So these two players averaged more than 430 meters gained per game last year, and they led the club. Both of them played all 27 games. You're going to get this
Well,
one.
Dane Zorko is an easy one
There
there.
you go. Yep, 511, and the other one had 430.
Darcy Wilmot? No,
No, yeah,
not
and the funny thing is, you have not mentioned his name once tonight.
Hugh McCluggage.
Yeah,
Yeah,
his
okay. There
name
we
has not been mentioned until just now.
go. Oh, and doesn't that show the sort of riches that we have at the
Yeah,
line?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you guys figure out how to kick some goals. You're gonna get your picture taken with a cup again.
Well, it is a crazy thing to think about. I was thinking this recently. We kind of have now two midfield rotations
Hmm.
that are both of them, I would say, sit in the top 10 or 15 midfield rotations in the comp. So obviously you've got Neil, Dunkley, and McCluggage.
Yeah.
Now that's an obvious one. But then your next rung down after Neil Dunkley and McCluggage could be Ashcroft Berry or Ashcroft Rayner.
Hmm.
Like that's your B midfield is extraordinary as well. So there's a lot in there. And I
Yeah.
mean, look, Hugh is a all-time sort of favorite of mine. I had a great chat with you on grand final night after the win. And he's just such a mellow guy, Hugh, and he was so mellow after the win as well. And I remember getting a photo with him and I'm standing next to him and he goes, "So how are you doing, Dom? How's life going?" And I was like, "Hugh, you just won a premiership. Let's
Yeah.
just don't worry." I've
Yeah.
met him a couple of times through media and he's just a lovely guy here. But
Hmm.
I'm like, mate, this is not the time where you have to be courteous and ask me how my life's going. You won a flag 2 hours ago.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. That's. But
Uh,
and that's and if you happen to be listening to this and you're not a footy fan, this is one of the things that the this is one of the theses that I've developed over the years is that sports sport in the United States, the athletes here are paid, we kind of alluded to this, the amounts of money that we're not likely to run into that person, in the local grocery store or at
Yeah,
the
right,
local
right, right.
restaurant. You're not running you're not in the same orbit that they are. But
Yeah.
with the footy, and I'm not sure how it is with rugby or even with with cricket, but there's you could theoretically find yourself running into you know Hugh McCluggage in the dairy case at Woolworths
Oh, I do. I'm
picking
not
up.
you, but a number of them live near me. So I see Zach Bailey at the shops regularly at the
Mhm.
Woolies.
Yeah,
And
I mean
it's funny in Brisbane because AFL isn't the biggest sport in Brizzy. They largely go unnoticed. So
hmm
you'll see Zach Bailey. My dad saw Zach Bailey at the Woolies nearby. This
yeah,
is like 2 or 3 weeks after Zach's won a premiership, and Zach's just strolling through the fruit and veg department, and no one's bothering him. No one's going, "That's a premiership player."
yeah.
So it's one of those funny things. So I have often had those sort of encounters. I mean, after we did our event with Chris Fagan, I had to go and sort of give him his cut for the event. So I went over to Chris Fagan's place, and we're standing at the front of his apartment, and like just on a street in Balimba, and no one stops by, no one
hmm
stops. People just walking past with their dogs. No one's going like, "Oh my gosh, it's Chris Fagan,"
Yeah.
and I find that so funny because I think about if you were to take the American example and you had Steph Curry sort of just strolling through the Trader Joe's sort of
Yeah,
you know
exactly. It would be
the
they would be
aisles,
mobbed. I mean,
it would be absolute chaos, and within a
yeah.
minute there'd be a post out there that he's here. You'd have
Well,
thousands within 20
and
minutes.
the thing is, he probably wouldn't be there.
Yeah, yeah,
He'd have some, and that's kind of what I was alluding to. He'd have somebody who's working on his behalf. His dietitian is doing
yes,
his shopping at the store.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. No,
So
it's a very different thing in Australia, thankfully.
two more questions for you here.
Okay.
Okay. All right, because I know we've been going at it here for a bit here, and I know you need to
And mate, look, when the Lions win a premiership, I can talk about it extensively. And you know what? I hope that next January we're doing this again, and I'm saying, hey, look how wrong I was. We did it without
you know
Joe.
what I if anybody's going to be wrong, I hope you are. I mean, of course, yeah, I have to hope that my side wins. We'll see how we replace our key forward.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, true,
that's good. Yeah.
true.
So, through the history of the Lions, has the club won more games at the Adelaide Oval or at Cardinia Park?
Oh, that is a good question because we've had a lot more luck at Adelaide Oval in recent times. But when you say history of the Lions, are you including Fitzroy in
No,
this?
I'm talking about just Brisbane Lions, not Fitzroy,
Brisbane?
just
Oh, well, then
Brisbane, just
it's
Brisbane.
got to be Adelaide Oval, I'm guessing.
At Adelaide, 4 wins, 9 losses, 1 draw. In Geelong, 5 wins, 13 losses.
We've won 5 times as the Brisbane Lions in Cardinia Park because we haven't
Yeah,
won there over 20 years.
yeah,
So we must have won there a lot in the late 90s and early 2000s. I
yeah,
guess we were pretty good in the early 2000s, but
yep.
because when Brisbane beat Geelong in the prelim final, in the season just gone, it was our first win over Geelong in Victoria since 2004. And the Lions are only a merged entity, from
hmm
98 onwards.
Right,
So
right.
this sort of bizarre, like we must have won 5 games there in 4, 5, 6 years. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay.
Well,
And
good
the
to know.
last question for you. There are two Brisbane Lions that have over 1,000 tackles in their time with the club. Who are they?
Oh,
Now
wow.
it's one of them is playing. One of them I am very confident we talked about last year. I surely remember this name popping up last year.
Really?
Yeah.
So one of them's still playing.
One of them still playing.
Well, it's got to be Dane Zorko then.
It is Dane Zorko, 1,450. Yep.
Wow. And the other one came up last year. I mean,
I'm pretty sure we talked. I don't. He wasn't playing last year, I don't believe, but I think he came up in conversation last year, if I recall.
okay.
But
Well,
again, I'm an old man and I forget things, so I could be completely wrong.
my inkling would have been Simon Black,
That's
but
it. Yeah, that's
that's
it.
him. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
There you go. Right.
yeah.
That doesn't shock me. It shocks me that Zork is that high because Zork only started his career at 22 or 23.
hmm
So that's incredible.
yeah.
That's
So
incredible.
that's yeah.
Wow.
So
Well, it's good to
you
get
know
out on a win. I'll take, you know what? I feel like that was the last question, wasn't it?
that was. I mean, I had a couple of others, but I'm gonna, we're gonna. That was
What I
actually gonna
feel
be.
like happened here, I feel like this is a bit like the Lions season in 2024, where
hmm
it was shaky at stages throughout, but then sort of an incredible comeback at the end. And maybe had to do it from outside the top four. I was
Yeah,
13th at the midway point of the season. People wrote me off, but there I was at the very end of the campaign holding up the trophy.
and that's the one thing I didn't ask you. Who do you have in the top four this year?
Well, that's a very good question. A lot of people are going Frio. A lot of people think Frio are going to jump,
Yeah.
whereas I'm actually more confident personally if there's going to be a surprise sort of jump up the ladder, that it would be Adelaide. I just there's something about the way the Crows have built their list which I just think has been underrated. I've been
hmm
saying it for a couple of years though, and I've been wrong. So it's not worked out for me so far. But in terms of the four, I find it really, really, really tricky at the moment because there is a strong case for so many teams. Like if you look at Sydney, Geelong, Hawthorn, Port Adelaide, Brisbane, Collingwood, I could make an incredibly strong case for all six of those teams
And you probably
to
could
be in
even
the
throw
top four.
GWS into the mix.
Yeah, well, I was going to say
Yeah,
I'll get to the Giants, but I was going to say I could make a very strong case for all six of those to be
yeah.
top four. I could also make a strong case for all six of those teams to not make the eight. Like this is what's so funny about
That's
it.
true. Yeah,
You could say that if Geelong missed the eight, you could sort of go, well, they dipped back a bit, they've lost a couple of players, and they're sort of in a rebuild of sorts.
right,
If
right.
Port missed the eight, no one would be shocked by that. If Brisbane missed the eight, well, they just won the
You know,
premiership.
I don't know if you saw the news, but did you see the news that Todd Marshall ruptured his Achilles tendon?
Yeah, I did see that. Yes, yeah,
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 that's. I
right.
mean, that just I wonder now
Mm,
where's Port Adelaide's offense going to come from?
right, right.
Charlie
So
Dixon's gone as well, and granted he had tapered off quite a bit, but I mean it's going to be they may have to rely on their smalls as well, and something similar to what you're thinking your club may be doing.
look, and so I guess I think I probably have two locks for the top four.
hmm
Uh, I think GWS, I can't see them not doing it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to throw Carlton in there as well. I think Carlton have been waiting and waiting and waiting, and I just think they're going to have a strong year. Speaking of predictions that people make every year that never end up happening, but I am confident or somewhat confident, as confident as you can be about those two
hmm
teams being in the four. Beyond that, I just cannot call it because Sydney, like this is what's so weird about this season is Sydney could be top of the ladder again and come
Right,
back
right.
hungry, or they under a new coach could be a bit scarred and they lost Luke Parker, they take a step back, they slide down to 10th, 11th again. That they had some underbelly sort of exposed with that Port Adelaide thrashing as well. So who knows where the Swans are? Like the Demons, are the Demons still in their premiership window, or are they going to
Yeah.
finish 15th? Like
Good question.
who the heck knows?
Who's
Collingwood
gonna
have the oldest list just about of all time now. Now is that
yeah
going to push them back into contention?
who's
Contention, or are they going to slip down? Who knows?
is Melbourne contemplating, how do we rebuild our midfield for next year? Because Petrarca may decide he wants out, and it sure sounds like Clayton Oliver wants to go somewhere else and almost
Right,
left.
right,
So
right.
it's
So this is I guess this is the funny thing is that I can kind of make a really good argument for about I reckon 11 teams
hmm
to be real contenders in 2025. And almost all of them, the only team I really can't make a strong argument as to why they mightn't be is the Giants. The Giants should be primed.
yeah,
The Giants should be, if I was a Giants fan, that they should be so filthy about the way we beat them in that semi-final. They probably should have won the premiership this year, the Giants. They were ahead of the runners up, the Swans, with by what, 28 points with
yeah.
10 minutes, 15 minutes to go in the first final. They were ahead of the Premiers by 44 points in the third quarter of the semi-final. I mean, the Giants, by all rights, probably should have been the premiers last year. And to that mix, they've thrown in the enigmatic but incredibly
Yeah.
prodigiously talented Jake Stringer.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, who knows what happens? But if the Giants didn't make the eight, I would be staggered. To me, they're my standout premiership tip
Hmm.
this year, Giants. And so I'll back them in. But beyond that, I mean, if Brisbane finished second, I wouldn't be shocked. If we finished 10th, I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah.
If Freo was second, I wouldn't be shocked. If they were 13th, I wouldn't be shocked. If the Gold Coast were fourth or 15th, it's just
Right.
I
Right.
just feel like I have no way. It feels
Yeah.
so impossible to read more than I can remember because there
You could
seems to be
almost,
strength and cons to
yeah,
everyone.
you could almost make the argument that there's one, maybe two, possibly three teams that don't have a shot at playing finals. And the one that if you want to bet a dollar and see if you can pay off your house, you put a dollar bet, wager down on Richmond playing finals.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't think Richmond's playing finals this year.
No,
It's
no.
not, they're going to be, but I think that their rebound is going to be a lot quicker than, because they had a lot of draft capital this past year. So
Yeah.
they restocked the shelves pretty quickly. So,
They did. They did.
yeah,
So I think Richmond won't be out of it for too long. I think
yeah,
they'll probably have another 2 or 3 years out
yeah,
of the finals, but they'll
yeah,
start to push pretty quick if they've got the drafting and the culture and the head coach and everything right. I'd be pretty confident as well that West Coast aren't ready yet
yeah,
to push.
yep,
And I don't quite think North are a finalist yet, but I
yeah.
do think they will go up the ladder. And I wouldn't be shocked if they did have one of those, like Brisbane 2019 went from 5 wins to
Or
17 wins in one off.
Hawthorne last year.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So North,
And Hawthorne did that last year with, a good chunk of their defensive structure out the entire year. I mean, so
right,
they're
exactly.
they've got they're reloading their defense similar to what you're going to be doing with Coleman and Duday getting factored back into the equation as well. So I mean, it's you
Yes.
got you guys, if you can score some goals, you got an embarrassment of riches there. So you should feel pretty darn good about it.
Well,
If
do you know what
nothing,
I do? I do, and I'm not probably one thing I haven't said yet, which is worth saying, is there is an element where everything feels a bit like icing now to me. And that feeling won't last forever. But Will Anderson, the
hmm
Aussie comedian who's a diehard Bulldogs fan, he'd waited his whole life to see the Bulldogs win a premiership. And I heard him talk after 2016, and he said he thinks it bought him pretty much at least 5 years of watching footy without really being that anxious when the team lost.
okay,
Well, I've seen a flag. So, and I kind of hope it is like that. So, if the Lions can stage an incredible year and win another premiership, oh my
yeah,
gosh, no one on the planet's going to be happier than me. But
right, right,
it's more me saying that, like, oh, well, we won one. So that's like a grace period now.
yep,
Um,
yep.
whatever happens from here, I can just chuck on the replay of the 2024 grand final.
There you go. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So Don, before we go, where can people find your work when you actually go back to work since you've been traveling around here and having a wonderful time? Um, where can people, hear you um, talking footy or whatever else it is that you're doing with the other podcasts that you've been part of and well as your radio show?
Well, the one hub of it all, probably my most used social media is Instagram. If you go to Dom Fay, DOMFAY on Instagram, I sort of post all the things I'm up to in on Instagram stories and whatever else there. In terms of the footy stuff, the Raw Deal, spelled ROAR deal, is where you'll find us. We'll be back. I think we are looking at like Jan 28 is our first episode back for the year.
Okay,
So you'll hear me make probably my big prediction about the Ashcrofts All Australian there, and I
there you
can't wait
go.
for Mike Whiting's response to that one.
Okay,
But and if you go there as well, actually to the Raw Deal podcast feed, the of everything I've ever done in any capacity professionally, the one thing that I would recommend that's been the highlight of my working life, to be honest, was the podcast we did with Chris Fagan at the end of November. So
hmm
went for a touch over an hour, and we spoke to him about the whole course of the season. And Chris Fagan is just such a lovely, endearing man, and hearing him tell the stories, the comedy, the laughs, the depth, the emotion of it, it was just phenomenal. So you can go and hear our whole live event with Chris Fagan on the Raw Deal Patreon. Also, just the Raw Deal podcast feed, and we have a Patreon as well called
Okay,
Raw Deal if people want to support the Raw Deal
fantastic.
way as well. So
And
um,
I'll have those links in the show notes for it. And can they stream your radio show also if they want to?
yes. So when is this episode going up, Craig? I should ask you.
It'll come out fairly soon. I mean, I'm going to work on getting this edited this week and maybe even by the end of this week, actually.
Okay. Well, I think I can probably say this announcement then because I think it's happening tomorrow. So I'll probably be okay saying this. But I'm in a slightly new radio time slot this year. So you'll be able to hear the Zach and Dom show on the KISS radio network in Australia,
Hmm.
which is KISS 101.1 in Melbourne, KISS 106.5 in Sydney, and KISS 97.3 in Brisbane. We are on from 8 till 10 p.m., Monday to Thursday nights. And you can also hear us on Saturday mornings from 6 to 8 in the morning, and that's also on Mix in Adelaide. So you can get the Zach and Dom podcast if you want to hear sort of another version of me doing
So
a more
so
lighthearted
wait a
comedy.
minute. You finish a show at 10 o'clock at night on Friday and you got to be back in on the air at 6 o'clock on Saturday?
Okay, I'll give you a slight little secret tip. The Saturday morning show is pre-recorded.
Okay. Okay. Because I was gonna say, I mean, that is why who negotiated that for you? If that was the case, I mean that's a bit of a raw deal.
Very, very true. Very true.
Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, my guest has been Dom Fay, and Dom, this has been an absolute pleasure. I congratulate you on the success of your club in 2024. I hope they have a great year. I do know that I'm pretty sure they played the Cats twice this year, if I'm not mistaken. They open up with them.
Yeah, opening
Um,
round. I've never seen this. Unfurling the flag. I can't wait to see what
yeah,
that looks like. That's gonna be special.
that's gonna be awesome. I've never seen that. I mean, I've watched it, on a Cats game on television from, 14,000 kilometers away, but I did see it happen live. But and it was probably if I remember correctly, it was actually a Cats home game they had to play at the MCG. No, I'm kidding. They did, but they're only playing two there this year. They're only playing two home games at the MCG this year, so they've been able to wrestle back one home game into Geelong, which is, there was a lady that worked in the Cats office, and I believe she's passed away. I know that was one of their goals was to get all 11 or 12, depending upon the situation, home games back in Geelong eventually after the addition to the stadium. So we'll see if
Yeah.
that happens. But Dom, I appreciate your time, sir. This was a lot of fun. Um, you are a great steward of the game, and you share wonderful stories, and you're an absolute gem, and I really have enjoyed talking to you tonight, and hopefully we can do this again next year as well. However, either of our clubs turn out. So
Maybe we'll get another prelim, hey? Another
there you
prelim
go.
with each other, and
So we'll play
hopefully
each
it
other
goes the same way.
if it must. Yeah, okay. Well, I gotta go now, but Dom, hey, any closing thoughts before you leave?
Oh, well,
Before
it's
we wrap
just
it up.
an honor to be here again, and thank you for having me on. Honestly, I've thought often over the last year about the episode we did at the start of 2024, and particularly when things weren't going well for the Lions, thinking, remember back to that chat I had with Craig and my belief that it was going to be a good season.
Hmm.
So, yeah, it's sort of I think my favorite thing about footy, and we found this so much with our Raw Deal community
Hmm.
is the way we live in such a isolated, divided world where there's very few gathering places for people anymore, like there have been throughout history. And I feel like footy is one of the main beacons of, a gathering place where people come together who hold all sort of different backgrounds, political
Right.
views, financial backgrounds, whatever it might be. And just at least for those few hours of the weekend, there is a bit of a community formed in this experience that we all share together. And to be able to share it with someone who lives on the other side of the world feels like a part of that whole story on a whole new level.
And we're in the same time zone right now though. So
We
yes,
are.
we
We're
are. It's
very rare
10:40
twist.
it's 10:42 in the evening here on the East Coast of the United States. So Dom, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your evening and enjoy the rest of your stay in the US. I hope you have a great time. Um, I will tell you if you're in Georgia, the boiled peanuts highly overrated. Don't. Just don't do it, okay? Just
Okay.
skip it. Just yeah.
I'll keep that in mind
Tell
if I see
somebody
it tomorrow.
you tried them, and I wish you luck finding iced tea without sugar in it down there.
Okay. All
Oh,
right.
your tea is gonna have you're gonna have to make an appointment with your dentist if you when you go home if you drink more than one glass of it.
Well, this is all helpful local info, so I'll
Yeah,
use that in my day in
yeah
Georgia tomorrow.
I lived in Georgia for a few years when I was married to my first wife a long time ago.
Yeah.
We won't go there. Okay. Well, have a great evening.
Awesome.
Cheers.
Thanks so much.
You
Thank
bet.
you.
Bye bye. All right, Dom, thanks so very much for sitting down to chat with me, sir. I know it's a little chilly where you are, and soon enough you'll be back in Brisbane. Sunshine, blue skies, beaches, that sort of thing. We'll keep muddling through the snow here for a couple of more months. Now, ladies and gents, remember you can find everything related to my podcast over at my website, ayankonthefooty.com. I've got dozens, hundreds of interviews that I've done over the last 7 years. Love talking to all of you. If you know somebody who would be a great guest for the podcast, somebody who's been a great local player, maybe you're a huge super fan of your club and you want to reach out, please reach out to me over again on my website at ayankonthefooty.com. There's a register as a guest page. Shoot me that email at ayankonthefooty@gmail.com. Reach out to me on my socials. I would love to chat with you. I absolutely love telling the stories and sharing the stories of footy fans from all facets of the game, from local to the state and national competition, as well as all over the world as well. So, folks, get subscribed. If you want to help out the podcast, you can click on that Buy Me a Coffee page or click on my Redbubble store page. I'm still working on some new merch that's going to be in the store here, hopefully very soon as well. Leave a review over on Apple Podcasts or over on my website as well. It'd be a huge help. It really, really helps to give me some credibility to share those reviews on social media to let other people know that, hey, maybe this guy's worth checking out. So, look out for each other. Check up on your friends. Let them know you care. Go out and have that coffee. Go get that beer if that's your beverage of choice. But if you're not okay, check in with somebody. Make sure they're okay as well. All right. It's been a really tough 3 or 4 months for me, and I'm trying to get myself into a better place. Had a good doctor's appointment. Have put on a little bit of weight due to stress, and my blood work was great, but with all the stuff that's been going on, and I talked about that in the most recent episode. I won't rehash that here. Again, Dom, thanks so very much. Ladies and gentlemen, appreciate the kind words. And as always, may your dribble kick never hit the post. I will catch you later. And this has been episode 361. Head on my website, get on this mailing list, reach out on the socials. I'd love to hear from you. Share the episode with your friends and family. That's the biggest help you can give me if you enjoy it. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, cheers and goodbye.